Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this final fourth of four on this short series of EdTech Autumn Vodcasts. My name's Bruce Wilson. For those of you that don't know me from outside the group, I'm an educational technologist with United Learning, and I'm also currently acting up and co-leading our department. And that essentially means helping me and my team sort of work with our schools on digital strategy. And the team that I work with are also working with schools beyond the group at the moment on the EdTech Demonstrator Program. And this series of webinars is designed for them as well. Now, just on the screen there, the series itself is designed to just provide a little bit more guidance on our digital strategy and specifically the toolkit that sits behind it. So if you're a United Learning school, just a quick reminder really, if you don't know where to find that by now, it's on United Hub. If you use any of the search functionalities on United Hub, do a search for digital strategy or digital strategy toolkit for schools, and you will come to this page. And over the course of the series, we've been basically providing a little bit more guidance on the document stack, which is this group of resources at the bottom here. If you're not a United Learning school, if I can talk a bit slower today, and you're one of these schools on the Demonstrator Schools program and engaged with that, either working with us or one of the other great demonstrators, then we've put a copy of this toolkit on their website, and specifically you need to go to the resources section here, and you'll find exactly the same document stack in there. And again, these recordings are on there and available for you. So yeah, in summary, all of these resources and all of the recordings of these vodcasts are available to schools within our group and with all and beyond it. So the toolkit itself, it's a collection of resources that we've made available through all of those means, and really it's not one strategy and it's not one solution. It's a series of resources, a framework, if you will, to help and assist schools write their own digital strategy in their own context. There are some things in there which are really important to us and our schools, but yeah, we hope it's a collection of resources that could be used by any school to accelerate and write a digital strategy in your own kind of context. Just before I sort of hand over to today's guest for our schools, and again, these are available on the external sites as well. As I said, this is the fourth of four, so it's the last time you'll hear from us before Christmas, but the recordings of the first three are up there in the useful links section of the hub, and you can see that they directly marry to the sections in the toolkit. So the first one was all around leadership and governance. That's the first section in the toolkit, and so on and so forth. So that was a deliberate attempt to just provide a little bit more guidance on each of those kind of sections, really. Before I start throwing more questions at today's kind of guests, I just wanted, this is really just for United Learning Schools, just wanted to flag one additional thing which we've added in the last 2 or 3 weeks or so, and that was that's in section A5, and I've added this document here. It's 5.4, and it's just giving a little bit more detail on engagement responsibilities, essentially what we're expecting for schools and by when. Now, I won't go into that now. If we have a little bit more time at the end, perhaps on the Q&A, I will go on to that. But in summary, this term for us has been very, very focused on the toolkit and providing lots of help and support around the toolkit. But to come, as you might expect, we're going to be kind of upping the ante a little bit after once we get through the Christmas festivities, and we will be expecting a digital strategy back for schools. And so there's a little bit more detail in that document there. And then just a nod to today's topic, which is all around financial planning. You know, we are going to be not just expecting that kind of digital strategy back from us, but also that strategy is affordable, sustainable, and budgeted for. So I'm going to be quiet. That was by far enough for me. I'm going to introduce my colleague Dan Bunker, who's on the call. Just want to say hello, Dan.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and yeah, thanks for joining us today. As Bruce was saying, it is going to be recorded if colleagues want to access the recording later.
So for those of you that don't know Dan, all of us gave a bit of an introduction to our backgrounds on previous calls, so we won't repeat that. But I'm going to be the interviewer today, and Dan's going to be the expert. And this last podcast is all around financial planning. So let's hand over to Dan. Dan, do you want to just start with maybe sharing your screen and just show us where this section is? Perhaps also talk about the first document in there, which is, it follows the structure of all the other sections, isn't it? There's always an overview document. Should we start with that?
Yes, thanks, Bruce. So I'll just confirm you're seeing the screen. I'm on the toolkit webpage, and I'm just going into section D here, which is where we've got our financial planning documentation. Now, at the outset, I should say there's a relatively brief section in terms of, you know, the documentation compared with some of the others where there may be, you know, much more guidance and, you know, videos and so on and so forth. This is very much, you know, a straightforward method of trying to make sure your digital strategy is, you know, sustainable and properly financed. In a way, it's the easy bit. All the difficult thinking should have gone on beforehand in terms of, you know, what is your vision? Where are you in terms of your school audit? What kit do you want to provide as part of your strategy vision? All that thinking is quite complex and will take time, whereas you know, listing it in terms of its cost is relatively straightforward, vital, but it's not a huge undertaking. Now, as Bruce was saying, there's two sections in here. The first one is the financial planning overview. When you click on that, it'll open in a new window, and it'll be a Word document. Just to save a bit of time, I've got the documents already open, so that just saves me having to kind of open it in a new window. So this is the first section here, and this is really just designed to give an overview for anybody who's just dipping into this section. And it basically talks you through that you're going to do some financial planning, and you're going to use potentially a modeler, an Excel spreadsheet to help you do that, but you don't have to use a modeler. You can use a simple, you know, tabular form in Word. It's not so much the method you use. It's more that it's done and that everybody understands it's done and can read the implication in a simple kind of way. So we're not saying all schools need to be kind of masters of Excel, although it does bring certain benefits when you're playing around and modeling. So this section then really just tells you what's in the toolkit, and I've just recently added here just a reminder of the recommended United Learning funding formulas for digital strategy. Now, this isn't something I made up. It is something that has been thought through by you know, our leadership team at United Learning, and it was via their actual leadership conference that they shared this recommended funding formula for your CapEx budget for digital strategy. And you can see there for primary schools is a kind of a base level of £15,060 per pupil, and for secondary there's a slightly higher base level of £20,000 and a £65 per pupil kind of allocation. So obviously larger schools will put in you know, more finance towards the strategy than smaller schools. That's how that works, but there are certain baselines that have to be maintained whatever the size of the school. So that's the recommended formula that's been shared with heads and business managers, no doubt, over the last few months. So section 1 then in D1 is just that overview, and then we can take a moment to look through these different documents. Just before I do that, Bruce, was there anything you wanted to ask about that funding formula or that kind of overview section?
Yeah, well, just to reinforce what you said, really, Dan. There's lots of evidence which we lots of workings rather which we can provide if that's of interest to schools. Whether you're an academy or an independent school, actually some independents in our group. That's a pretty good kind of starting point. I think as you naturally said, in an ideal world, this would all follow sequentially, wouldn't it? So you'd kind of work through sections A, B, and C, and get to the point where your digital kind of strategy is sort of worked up, and then financial plan it. But like we said at the start of this term, really, and certainly at the start of the autumn series, we are conscious that different schools are at different points in time, so by the end of the academic year, we might well have further or better developed digital strategies from some rather than others. All of that said, as a group of schools and as an educational community, kind of, I think nationally post-pandemic, we've really put we've drawn a kind of line in the sand and just said, look, we can't. We must take this seriously, kind of moving forward. So, whatever your kit strategy, whatever your digital strategy, the bottom line is technology does cost money, and therefore we need to be kind of putting the money aside, really. So in our group, like lots of schools around the country, come the new year, business colleagues will be starting that kind of budget round, and I'm not naive. I don't think we're going to get fully developed digital strategies in January, but we will, as an organisation, we will be sort of closely monitoring how much money is kind of put aside, really, even if it's for some point in the future, really. So yeah, just to kind of reiterate that point, and just an additional point before we look at the second section. Just a reminder for our schools, really, that in the second podcast, when we looked at auditing, if there are any gaps in your infrastructure needs, if your cabling or your switching or your wireless needs boosting, that is highly likely to be mopped up by the SCA funding that we get kind of internally as a group. So really, what Dan will now talk about is anything apart from that needs to be met from school budgets.
Yeah, I think.
Right, go on, Dan. Sorry.
Just to pick up that point, Bruce, the model tool will still pick up whether your infrastructure needs changing or when it's refreshing. It's just that the financing of that may be through some additional SCA funding as well, but it will still go into your model. But hopefully you may, can't guarantee it, you may get some support for those costs, but we can't guarantee that at this stage. I think it's a movable feast there, but our long-term planning needs to bear in mind those kind of refresh requirements. So what we've got in this section D2 are the actual modeler tools. What I'm going to do is I'll start with our Excel pieces first. They're the actual model. The blank one I won't open because it is blank. There's nothing to see in it. I will work through a completed one, which is just there for as an example. As I say, there's 2 Excel sheets in the toolkit, and then there's some notes how to use it, which I'll open. And then for those who perhaps, I'm not going down the Excel route at this stage, I just need in the first instance to make a table of the next 5 years and the key expenditure areas. I mean, that might be the kind of the summary document that ends up in your digital strategy documentation, or you may end up with you know, a screenshot of the Excel or a link to the Excel document or whatever. But as I say, all schools are slightly different. Some will feel you know, much more comfortable in Excel environments and others may not. So we're deliberately not saying you have to complete a set tool, but you do have to show your financial plan for the 5-year period. So I'm going to open up Excel here, and I've got, as I say, the modeler tool, but rather than it be blank, it's got, you know, some data punched into it and can be used for that modeling. Now, actually, I'm not going to take credit for developing the modeler tool. That goes to our colleague James Garnett, who put it together in the first place. We may have just you know, refined it and checked a few formulas, etc. But credit where credit's due. James developed the modeler, and he's come up with kind of three sections of the spreadsheet, and the first one is based on the assumptions, and these are kind of things that we've discussed as a group. How long do things last? That's quite important that we're consistent about that. You might think, well, a school in a certain part of the country, maybe they don't get the lifespan that they should, but in terms of refresh, we're working with these particular lifespans, and you'll notice, you know, student-based devices are the shortest lifespan, and that's obviously for a reason. They have a fairly hard life in schools, therefore they're, you know, they're not expected to last long as a staff device, for example. So each of the devices has a lifespan and a broad cost associated with it. These costs are in line with the section 2, where we looked at baseline specifications and costs were attributed there as well. So, you know, and we're not saying that every PC is going to cost £550, but it's a good ballpark figure to base some financial modelling on. Hopefully these you know, a fairly accurate cost. You may be able to get, you know, a better deal every so often than that, but if we work on those, we'll be covered. And as well as the lifespan and the cost, there is something that James has put in, which is, if you like, the lifetime cost per annum of that device. So you know, a PC 7 times 79 will equal the 550. That's where those figures come from. So it just kind of tries to attribute the cost over its entire life. So that's the assumptions. We're not recommending you change those assumptions, but if you needed something else that we haven't thought of, then, you know, you can start to edit the modeler. But bear in mind that these cells will be taken forward elsewhere, so you just need to check that you're not, you know, affecting the spreadsheet further on. Now, the second, is there anything you wanted to mention on that one, Bruce, just before I move on?
Just briefly to, well, two things really. So firstly, obviously, much of that relates back to the other sections in the toolkit. So in section C, for example, you know, we're talking about the refresh of classroom kit, the refresh of teacher devices, and the refresh of student devices. So that was kind of the first point. The other point is I'm doing lots of work with lots of schools, not so much in the primary phase, but in the secondary phase, where I'm mapped to around classroom refresh. Before you kind of get into the detail of the modelling, schools are speaking to me around, okay, you know, we're considering maybe moving away from an interactive screen and a fixed PC, more towards a sort of a passive screen and you know, some kind of mobile device for teachers. Now, there are lots of pedagogical reasons why you might do that, but obviously schools are, when they first start exploring that, are also interested in the costs. So yeah, as I say, before you start getting into the detail of the modeler, it's worth flagging that that page does give you a kind of very, very top level, you know, room by room, if I'm changing my solution, you know, how much cheaper it might be. So we're gonna have a look at the modeling bit now, are we? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm just going on to the next section, which is called the School Technology Modeler. And in this, if I just zoom in a little bit, it basically gets you to catalogue the level of equipment that you are aiming to maintain as part of your digital strategy. So this is kind of, if you like, a list of all the things that you are going to be including in that digital strategy. So it comes from, section 2, the things that you've audited and know that you need to replace. It comes from the refresh section, section 3. What is that, device ratio that you're aiming to achieve for pupils? What is the right device mix for your pupils? And what does the classroom kit look like? So basically, what we've got here is a list of all the things that we're maintaining as part of our digital strategy. And you see it's got a number of pupils up there, and it's got how many screens do you want? There could be a mixture of passive and interactive depending on the age range of pupils or the particular pedagogy that is desired and designed for by your teaching and learning leads at the school. And it's an interesting debate. It's not one we're going to mandate that you must have product X in the front of the classroom. Obviously, it needs to be a bright, clear screen. And what we need to do in our digital strategy is make sure teachers have the tools they need to do effective modelling and scaffolding. And that's not necessarily the same tool for every phase of teaching. So it's getting that kind of mix right as part of your refresh section. You can see in this example, there happen to be 12 interactive screens and 4 passive ones. It could be any combination of those, or it may be that there's no touch screens. It depends on the classroom design that's being worked on. This model here has some IT, has one IT suite. It is a primary model, and primary schools are debating whether they want to maintain an IT suite. And again, there's arguments for and against. The model doesn't try and tell you what's right and what's wrong. Schools are going to decide that for themselves. But if they're going to invest in one, then they need to maintain it. That means those PCs, if they are PCs in that suite, will need replacing at some point, and that needs to be modelled. And all the things here, the trolleys, all those kind of things that are possible to have in a school mix. So we've got trolleys of Chromebooks, we've got maybe some individual devices for students that we're trying to maintain, iPads and so on and so forth. So this basically sets out all the different items, plus some kind of one-off things that may be required, visitor management systems, projectors for halls, and so on and so forth. This list here might be something that you need to edit slightly because of your school particular circumstances. So the notes down the right hand side just give you kind of just a bit of guidance on there, and we have got some additional guidance notes as well to go with the modeler. So basically this section just shows you everything that you've got as a list. And then when we move on to the next section, that kind of spreads it out over the life of the strategy on an annual cost model basis. So just before I go on to that, is there anything you wanted to mention, Bruce, here or ask, or is that reasonably straightforward?
I think that makes sense. Just want to sort of highlight the yellow things, Dan, because sometimes that might come out of a sort of IT capital budget, and sometimes it may appear elsewhere. But do you want to just say a little bit more on that, or is it self-explanatory?
I think the yellow ones there, they're highlighted yellow because you might want to edit them. That's the first thing to say. And the second thing, that is quite an interesting point about leasing. I mean, particularly things like reprographics printers. A lot of schools now are going towards a kind of leasing model for those if they're not already on them. And obviously, the more you lease, the less kind of you need on the capex side. So leases are considered more, OPEX, so they come out of your budget and on an annual basis, whereas the CAPEX is that kind of one-off long-term expenditure. Now, that recommended formula is for CAPEX, but if schools were leasing a large amount of kit, obviously they need to have a conversation and a think about, their CAPEX requirements will be less because their OPEX ones are more. So there is perhaps a nuanced conversation to have there. When you do your modelling as to you may not be using the full UL formula because that's designed for CAPEX, and you're using a lot of OPEX money to lease. A lot of our independent schools will lease iPads. Therefore, they're not going to need to buy out of CAPEX a huge quantity of iPads because the pupils, have them through a lease or whatever scheme. So that's one of the things just to bear in mind there. And again, it's probably schools will want a conversation with their ed tech partner just to, we're all fully excited on that and understand it. So if you're not using the full formula, it may well be because you are leasing a lot of items.
Sure. All right, thanks, Dan. So there's another document, D 2.2. Now, does that provide some additional guidance? Is that right?
Not really. The idea of that, it does just kind of give you a little bit. A little bit of help, just tell instead of me here telling you what it is, you can just read about it. So the idea of this is, you may be just a bit off, put off by an Excel spreadsheet with lots of different pages. You think, what on earth's going on here? This is just tries to, help you out, telling you enter the quantities in the green cells, and then I'll get to this on the actual spreadsheet, and it just really talks you through how to use that spreadsheet. And I was grateful, I did put this together, but I found it quite helpful to kind of work through it in this systematic way, because when you first open the spreadsheet, I was scratching my head for a little bit thinking, well, what do I do here and what do I do in this bit? So that's the idea of the notes. It's just really hold your hand a little bit through it. And if we jump in now to the final section of the spreadsheet, which is kind of the meat and drink of it, really, this is where you get your figures to say, well, this is how much we need in our financial plan for a given year. And basically, all the devices that we've identified in the previous section, it may be we want 12 touch screens or however many it is. In this section, we put the percentage of that amount that we're going to replace in a given year. So it's not a number, it's a percentage. You've already got the number on the other page. So this is just how much of it. So if we've got, I don't know, let's say 50 staff laptops and they're all being replaced in this given year, then it's 100% of the laptops, which is equivalent to 50 in quantity. Whereas if we've got 50 touch sensitive touch screen devices like Surface Pros, Yogas, that kind of thing, then we only got 50% of it. Then this time it's 25 in this particular year and 25 in the next. Now you'll notice here that by the end of the year here, this plan starts in 2021 and ends in 2026, we're having to replace them again because we know there's that 4-year life cycle with those particular things. So you can see that, oh, hang on a minute, we've got over 150%, 50% here. Why is that? It's because the ones that we buy this year are going to need to be replaced by the end of the strategy. And the idea with this plan is that it's updated every year. So we don't just stop when we've done it in year one. We just simply add an extra year on, or move everything along or whatever. So it becomes a rolling program. And
I suppose Dan, there's the other aspect on that is kind of there. So there's the budgetary planning around that. There's the lifespan, but there's also the reality of the project as well. So it might be just logistically or difficult for staffing reasons to literally replace every classroom at Easter or summer, and lots of schools phase that over a few years, don't they, as well? So that's the other operational reality of why you might do that.
Yeah, particularly with those higher cost items. I mean, we both work with schools where the AV refresh has been a crippling cost as a one-off payment, simply because there is no rolling program of replacing them. When to avoid that, we want to try and get it on a more of a rolling program where that's possible. And I know it's difficult because once you're in the cycle where, well, we bought, let's take a primary school, they bought 14 screens in 4 years ago, the chances are they're all going to fail at a similar sort of period of time somewhere down the line. But if they can start saying, well, maybe after 7 years we'll replace 3, and then and then 3 more, and then 3 more, and then that way we get a rolling program rather than one huge cost, which seems unaffordable if we don't plan ahead. And what happens with our figures here is they get transferred to the annual cost side of the spreadsheet. So 50% of the annual of the total for the touchscreen devices equates to that much, and then it all kind of gets collated here, and you can see by the time you get to the bottom what the actual costs are when all these things are kind of summed together. So that gives you a kind of a figure of how much this particular strategy is going to cost for this particular school. They can then perhaps reflect on how close is that to the actual recommended budget. Do they match? Are we spending a lot less? Are we spending a lot more? And we can investigate the reasons for that. If we're spending a lot less, is it because we're leasing a lot of items and we don't need the capital spend? If we're spending a lot more, is it because everything's due in 1 year? And is there a way of perhaps spreading that cost? So rather than replace the Chromebooks and the iPads all in 1 year, maybe we could do half the Chromebooks in 1 year and the other half another, then the iPad. So it just makes the cost easier to spread. And of course, some years you may not need the full amount of the formula funding because it just happens to fall that year there's not a lot of replacement. But then the idea then is you'd squirrel some money away, part of your capital reserves, to use maybe next year or maybe the year after when you've got a bit of a peak. Sometimes we get a bit of a peak, there's a lot of AV to do, the funding formula isn't enough for it, but the previous 2 years we've had some spare money that wasn't allocated, therefore that can build towards when we've got a peak. So that's the basic theory of it, and obviously that's all modeled out in an Excel sheet. Not every school will want to engage with the detail of Excel, so we have just put in some more simpler kind of ideas, and this is just the same kind of information, but it's in a Word document, just in a table. You could make this a spreadsheet, just a simple spreadsheet where you've got the same kind of things, where it will at least do the calculation for you. And here it's the same kind of thing. We've got down the left hand side a list of all the things that we are going to need during the life of our digital strategy, and then the year in which we're intending to replace them, and some outline costs of what that particular refresh, that particular investment equals, and then that will lead us again to a suggested minimum budget there, which we can then do that variance with. So fundamentally it's the same thing. The Excel modeler obviously gives a little bit more kind of in the detail, and also the ability to quickly change things and see how that models. So I would encourage the use of a spreadsheet simply to give you that flexibility to quickly say, well, what if we move this 15,000 into that year? How would that affect it? So I think nearly all of us, business managers, will be able to do that kind of spreadsheet modeling, albeit in a simpler form than the full modeler that we've put together in the toolkit. So that basically covers us for what's in here, and there's obviously just a blank table there with suggested headings that schools can adapt. So the key thing at this point then is really to have ascertained the ambition of the digital strategy. What does the classroom kit look like? What's our mix and that we're aiming for? How many devices are we aiming for in our school? And that way we can start budgeting for it and modeling, the year-on-year costs of making that strategy sustainable. And then in some format here, we will capture this to go into the digital strategy document. So people who are looking at this, whether it's a governor, or whether it's an outside, an ed tech person or the head teacher who hasn't been that involved in it, can quickly see, how this strategy has been costed. So there we have it, a quick guide to the financial planning documents in our digital strategy toolkit. Anything you want to just ask me there, Bruce, or go over again?
No, I don't think so, Dan. Thank you for that. That was really, really useful. I've got some closing remarks which I'll make in a second, and then we've got a few guests on the call today, so we're happy to take any questions on that. One thing that did occur to me just as you were closing up there is that sometimes not to add additional work on schools, but sometimes schools might find it helpful to do a couple of versions on this, particularly if they're exploring how to make different options for. I'm thinking particularly around classroom refresh. Like you absolutely said, this should be budget. Whatever the output is, this should be budgeted for in the planning that you've just shown here. But sometimes what schools do is maybe a like by like comparison. If we just replaced like by like on, I don't know, interactive screens, how much would it cost? Or if we explore another option, potentially, how much cost savings would apply really. Yeah, I mean that's kind of an option thing that I do know some schools have found. Giving a couple of options, particularly around the classroom piece, that might be kind of worth exploring, particularly if you're trying to save money, actually. And it just struck me that those are quite big, frightening numbers, aren't they? That's the other kind of point, really. And I think that what senior leaders, I think, find even more frightening than those sort of year-by-year numbers is if that kind of plan doesn't exist and lots of equipment fails after 5, 6, 7 years, and that's actually a compounded problem whereby there hasn't been that sort of year-on-year planning, and you get an even bigger number all in one go. Yeah, just there are lots of zeros after lots of those things, but it's absolutely the right thing to do to appreciate and plan properly for when stuff needs refreshing or schools are going down a different route from a kind of pedagogical angle. So. Yeah, thank you for all of that.
I was just going to say that, that the funding formula, when you look at it, has made a few schools' business managers' eyes water when they have seen it. But it's only when you kind of look into the entirety of the cost of maintaining, your IT infrastructure and your system and the ambition of your strategy that you realize you do need that much. But I know on the face of it, it looks like, wow, that's a lot of money. Why do we need to put that in? But when you think how many Chromebooks are now in school, they're not going to last forever. And if the schools are really enjoying the use, and from what I've seen, they really value that addition that it's given. But it does give us a headache in that. I guess we're not going to get another free handout in 3 years' time to say, those Chromebooks, that you had, they're all end of life now. Here's a load more. It's going to be, if we want it, we're going to have to fund it, and we're going to have to plan to fund it, and it not just creep up on us and hit us with a big bill when we're not expecting it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and sort of to follow on for that, I can point to quite a few examples with recent strategies where cost savings have been made. The shift to the cloud project, for example, means that we're not having weighty bills every 6 or 7 years on service, for example. Increasingly, when schools need to either update or refresh or bolster their wireless. You know, we're increasingly centering on a very cost-effective kind of solution for that. You know, MIS now is in the cloud, and small in-year savings kind of on that really. So, you know, do talk to your educational technologists and your technical specialists, because there are lots of examples, albeit with those numbers being quite big, where, you know, you may not have to spend as much as you might expect. But bottom line, like I said at the start, and let's just summarize before we take questions, you know, we've really set our stall out as a group that, you know, we don't want to be behind the curve on this. We want to take this seriously, you know, not for another pandemic, but for business as usual. And the bottom line is tech does cost money. That unfortunately is the bottom line. So hence all of those kind of resources there, and we hope you find them useful. Kind of moving forward, you know, we're going to be in the new year before we know it, and that will be the start of the group's budget round. I'm sure it will be in other schools as well. So, you know, increasingly there will be the expectation that that formula is met at the very least, but that ideally, whatever that number that is in the capital pot, it does reflect either a finished or developing kind of digital strategy. I'm always intrigued where I see nice round numbers, and when you ask the question, oh, you know, what's the plan behind that? You know, they really kind of should be something. And as we ramp up through the spring, you know, increasingly the team will get, I'm sure, you know, capex things to kind of sign off on really, and you know, there will be increasingly challenge back to the digital strategy. You know, essentially what's the teaching and learning, what's the pedagogical, but also what's the financial plan behind this, because, you know, we absolutely do need to move to a position, as Dan's shown there on the spreadsheet, where it's well thought through, it backs up everything that goes on as resulted from those earlier sections, and there is at least a 5-year kind of plan, rather than the situation. And I absolutely understand why schools do it, but we just need to kind of move from a position where, you know, basically what's left at the end of the year, and let's get a bit of tech. You know, that although that does provide some extra kit, it's kind of not really where we want to be in terms of longer term planning. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say by way of conclusion. So I'll stop talking. So we've got a few guests. I've enabled your mics, guys, or your cameras. Feel free to either ask a question verbally or type in the chat. You can see Mark's got his hand up there.
Do that password reset.
Am I okay to unmute?
Sorry.
Of course you are on mute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know that Dan spoke a little bit about leasing and the difference between capex and opex, and I just wondered if you could comment a little bit more about that, with helping schools to manage those large costs, because
yes,
in an ideal world, yes, we would have a capex plan, and on the years where we're not needing to spend as much, we will be saving that back. But in reality, that very rarely happens, and if there is extra cash, the school find other things to spend it on. And so therefore, you know, is leasing a good way of locking that money in, so it has to be spent each year. It does reduce the upfront cost of having to replace a lot of kit in one go, if that is the way the cycle falls. And also for things like, you know, devices that regularly need to be replaced every 3 years or 4 years, a lease offers a way of being able to hand the old kit back and get some new kit, and not greatly increase costs for that year. So I just wondered, you know, if that is, because the model is great, but in reality, I wonder how much of the digital strategy it should be offering leasing as an actual recommendation.
Yeah, I think you've almost answered your question with your question. So firstly, yeah, I mean, money's always tight. Let's always consider it. I think there are some scenarios where it, in an overall sense, in a long-term sense, where it does work financially as well. So you've hit the nail on the head. So, you know, typically on a one-to-one device program for students, very, very, very often the lifetime of the device, as Dan showed on the spreadsheet there, is you know, 3 to 4 years, and that almost completely matches with a typical lease that we might take up. So a sort of a 90% lease over 3 years. So you end up naturally not spending 100%, but 90% and spreading those costs over 3 years. And so that does, the advantage there is you've got complete site and you've got reduced sort of year-on-year payments. But the downside, as you naturally say, is we need to roll into another use in year 4. But you'd have to do that anyway, because, you know, once you're in that kind of project, as Dan naturally says, you know, it's difficult to kind of go back from a position where all young people have a device. So in that scenario, it kind of does work. If I go to the other end of the scale, you know, we can arrange leases for audio-visual kits, but the reality is that that kit is likely to last at least, I suspect, sort of twice the term of the lease. So you've got the advantage there of spreading it over 3 years. But to be clear, and some schools do not quite understand this, you know, leasing companies are there to make money out of loaning money. So it's unlikely that you're going to unbolt a screen from a wall after 3 or 4 years, and you're going to have to pay that end of lease amount. And we can, and lease companies are not allowed to legally sort of give you that in advance. We can have a fair stab at it, but that is an extra, somewhat uncited cost that might come at the end. But listen, I'd rather explore that option if schools are in crippling budgets, which, you know, let's be clear, some of them are. You know, I'd rather go down that route than have an aging 10-year-old projector that the kids can't see. And then you've kind of got the sort of, I suppose, middle ground where stuff's going to last kind of 5 or 6 years, which again, happy to have discussions with schools around, where, you know, there might be a bit of a middle ground there where you might you know, pay off that sort of end of lease term, but sweat the assets for a little bit longer. So absolutely, definitely works down at the kind of student device end. And I think you know, business managers sort of love that because you've got complete sight of year-on-year cost. Yeah, and can work elsewhere. I think our starting point needs to be, if we can afford it and we can plan for it and we can put money aside and we can fund it through capital, that should be the starting point. But as you rightly say, Mark, that's not always the reality of school budgets. So is that a fair summary? Dan, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a fair summary. It tends to work best where it is, you know, the life of the device is the life of the lease. It's cleaner that way. That you do need to bear in mind potentially a couple of extra costs with, you know, insurance might be a requirement. It certainly is with iPads, for example, if you're leasing those. So you do need to factor that in, and whether that you pay that up front or whether you pay it as part of the lease. And the other thing to bear in mind is don't underestimate the amount of time and energy it takes to return things at the end of their lease, because that is a burden for staff to get everything in, to check it still works and it is sent back with the charger it came with and everything like that. So although, you know, I really do see the advantage of leasing in certain situations, we need to go into it with our eyes open as to what needs to be done at the end of the lease as well.
The only other point I'd add, Mark, and this is slightly as a nod to perhaps some of our external viewers of this series through DSP. So, you know, we've done a lot of work as a group, and if you're at UL school, you know, thinking about this, you know, do talk to your educational technologist, do talk to your finance business partner as well. And we have we've already established in many cases recommended partners for this. If you're exploring that option kind of outside the group, you know, do your research. Often with financial deals that appear too good to be true, they're not too good to be true. And as ever, the devil is in the detail, in the fine print of these things. So do look at those interest rates, do look at those terms and conditions that apply to the end of the lease, go through all of that with a fine-tooth comb. As I say, leasing companies, although there are lots and lots of great ones out there, and we work with many of them, ultimately they are making money, lending money. That is the long and short of it. So just read the terms and conditions, I suppose, in summary, and look out for any kind of gotchas, particularly over return of kit, I'd say. So hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions? We don't need to use the full hour.
Well, one other thing then, Bruce.
Okay, yeah, please no, go. You can use the full hour if you'd like.
Yeah. So the other side of it is, I know that you've spoken about United Learning at a group level, purchasing with CapEx, devices that lots of schools want in common, so therefore getting discounts. Could part of that include helping schools with those year-on-year costs and the cash flow? If they needed to buy a number of devices and United Learning were able to buy them in bulk, could they help with the spread of the CapEx across a number of years for certain schools?
Well, I'm very kind of happy to look at that, especially if there's an element of kind of aggregated procurement in that. As you know from earlier sections, what Dan and I and the team don't want to do is, a sort of a carte blanche, everyone must take this solution, because we don't really believe in that. We don't really think that's going to work in the local context, and is a little bit divorced from what we do elsewhere. So, we do genuinely want schools to work through this toolkit, and particularly over that classroom and device refresh, to consider what they want in their own context to deliver their own teaching learning aims. But I'm sure once they've done that, what will emerge of that is a number of schools that will want similar things. And yes, I'm very happy to look at the biggest single thing that will help us to do that is, come, I don't know, February half term or even slightly later in the spring, is getting a number of returns from schools on particularly on that refresh thing for the next summer. So that from my perspective, the biggest single thing that will help with that number is us going to the marketplace and saying, I want to do 500 classrooms. That will really help that kind of conversation. So happy to look at it. Like I say, the biggest single thing that will help that leverage that conversation in the marketplace, particularly, is our volume. Historically, we've sort of gone to the market and said, look at us, we're a big group, and that provokes a little bit of interest. But even better if we can go and say, look, I want to do this number, then that will help drive down costs. So is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
That was a maybe. All right. Well, look, if there aren't any more questions, I hope you found that helpful. As I said, that's the last in a series of 4 we've done this term, working through those kind of different sessions. If you're a UL school, look out for all the recordings on the hub, and if you're a school that we or one of the other demonstrators are working with on the DFE scheme, again, all of those recordings are up on their website as well. And the final thing I'd say, other than we hope you're helpful, is do give us some kind of feedback, really. So both in our internal work with our schools, but also our external work with the DSP program. Obviously, as we work through the spring and the 2nd and 3rd terms, digital strategy will be ramping up. The DSP program will be running for 1 more term, hopefully more than that, but 1 more term that we know about. And we'd really love to be able to provide you with exactly what you need by way of support. So if this is working and you need more of the same, then it's always good to get that feedback. But equally, if you'd like something else, or things that you think we should be doing, or perhaps doing these in a slightly different format, then we've got broad shoulders, and we will happy to hear that kind of feedback as well. So in essence, anything we can do to help you with this work, that's kind of the role of our team, really. So please do feed things back, and we've got capacity to be flexible on that. So yeah, I'll say that as kind of concluding remarks. So let's finish there. Just on behalf of me, thanks to Dan for walking us through that section, and thanks to Gemma as well from the team. She's not on the call today, but I know she did a lot of work on the interviewing on the first podcast and presenting on the third one. So thanks to Gemma as well. If we don't speak to you before, have a lovely Christmas, and we'll be back in the new year in some shape or form. Thanks everybody. Thanks Dan.
Thank you, Bruce.